am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today. We've got Chelsea Good in the house from the Livestock Marketing Association in Kansas. Welcome back to the podcast, Chelsea.
Thanks so much for having me, Carrie.
So Chelsea, I want to go backwards in time. We originally met through the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Is that right?
Yeah, that is quite a few years ago.
A blast from the past. We were working together with the Young Producers Council. So tell me a little bit about your background as it applies to the beef industry.
Certainly. So my grandparents on my dad's side would have been cow-calf producers in Charlotte, Michigan. I actually grew up in Parker, Colorado, south of Denver. My dad's a livestock market analyst with CattleFax, has been for, shouldn't tell on him, but more than 35 years. So that's how we grew up outside of Denver, but with show steers and hogs, grew up in 4-H and FFA, and took a really early interest in the beef industry in particular and livestock policy. I remember doing some competitions early on that kind of set me on this ag law, beef policy track. I was a national beef ambassador, gave a speech, I believe, on the constitutionality of the beef checkoff program, which is a very cool thing for a high schooler to care about.
Yeah, that's so cool. That was an interesting era when that was kind of a hot topic in the legal industry.
Absolutely. And I think that it was probably when I was a national beef ambassador, I would have attended my first NCBA convention and really started to get involved in the policy work and enjoyed that. And so that set me on that path to pursue law school and a career in ag policy in particular.
So where did you do your undergrad, Chelsea, and what did you study?
So Kansas State University is my undergrad. I actually first spent 2 years at Butler Community College, judged livestock. Then I transferred up to K-State. Agriculture, communications, and journalism was my main bachelor's degree. Somebody told me I couldn't triple major, and so I took that as a challenge, and I did. And
oh my goodness, you're the first triple major I've ever met. You're an overachiever.
I don't know how wise it was, but I did it.
What were your three majors again?
So it was agriculture, communications, and journalism was my main degree. I also got degrees in public relations and political science.
Wow.
And then I became a collector. So I stayed an extra year and got a master's degree in communication studies before going on to law school at Washburn.
So what was the moment where you were like, I'm going to go to law school?
I've wondered that question, and I can't find my way quite far back enough. I think my dad, when I was pretty little, told me I liked to argue too much to be anything but a lawyer, and I tried other things. I really do enjoy writing, and ag comm is a passion of mine as well. But I think all along I kind of felt like law school was the path, especially as animal rights activism was becoming more and more prevalent. I felt like, and continue to feel like, we have opponents, people who do not believe we should be able to use animals for food products, that are training up a group of attorneys, and we better have attorneys on our side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's your advice for, and I know that most of our listeners are producers, but I know that I'm contacted, I'm sure that you're also contacted, to young people or people of all different age demographics that are wanting to possibly go to law school. What's your general advice to those people?
I think my first piece of advice is to learn to write. I think that the law school process, and it's changing a little bit, but for the most part, you're going to be graded at the end of the semester on a single test, and it's going to be a written work product. Honestly, I don't know if this advice is just for people going to law school. I think it's for people in general. We're not as good of writers as we once were. And I don't care
Mhm.
where you end up professionally, you're going to have to write your boss an email. You're going to need to do a memo, your report out of a meeting. So, my first piece of advice is almost always learning to write well.
That's such good advice. I mean, I feel like I'm a little bit more generic about it. I basically tell kids is this you need to get good grades. I don't care what you study, just get good
Yeah,
grades,
sure.
do well. But I think that those writing skills are invaluable. And then, furthermore, Chelsea, I didn't realize that you were also on a life cycle judging team. I too judged collegiately. I feel that life cycle judging really prepared me for being able to think on my feet in the
Mhm.
courtroom. So I don't know what your
Absolutely.
thoughts are on that.
I think livestock judging is one of the world's best activities. It teaches you to make decisions quickly and then be able to stand up and defend why you made the decisions you did. And that applies really well to a legal environment, but I think it applies well to every environment. The learning how to be decisive and learning how to explain your decisions, it can take you a lot of places in agriculture and outside of agriculture as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about a livestock, a traceability. I feel like the law in this area has been changing a lot over the last, 10 or 15 years. So maybe I'm wrong on that. Where are we right now with the law as it applies to cattle traceability?
So nationally, we do have a animal disease traceability rule. Not everybody realizes that. You get a lot of
Mhm.
discourse about traceability, and not everybody realizes we do have a federal rule right now. It's just limited as it relates to classes of animals. So your current animal disease traceability or ADT rule does require official identification of cattle if they are moving across state lines and fall into certain classifications. And those classifications are beef cattle that are sexually intact and 18 months of age and older, dairy cattle of any age, and then also cattle for rodeos and exhibitions as well. If you're moving interstate with any of those classes of cattle, official identification is required today. That's federal. You also have some states that are going to have some state specific identification requirements as well.
So let's talk about that official identification.
Mhm.
What kind of identification is required? Because you and I both know, especially in cattle, there's a lot of different ways to
Yeah,
identify cattle. It could be an ear tag, it could be an EID, electronic ID,
yeah.
it could be branded on them, or in some other way. So, what are the rules as it applies to the official ID?
The most common forms of official ID are going to be ear tags, and USDA has a list of what they consider to be acceptable official ID ear tags. The biggest deal is they have to have an official number on them that is provided by the government in order to meet the definitions. And a lot of your tag suppliers are going to have these official ear tags available. Some of them are no technology tags, some of them are. RFID electronic tags as well. There also are some exceptions. State by state, states can agree with one another to accept brands along with certain documentation or breed registration along with certain documentation. And that is a state vet decision that needs to be made in both the shipping and the receiving state.
So, why is this element of identification traceability important for interstate commerce?
I think that that's an interesting question. I think the focus, honestly, is on interstate commerce, just because that is how the federal government can get jurisdiction, right?
Mhm.
I think you've got multiple schools of thought out there in terms of the function of animal ID and how deep we should go into our herd to become identified. You'll have a school of thought that believes, from a disease perspective, you want to know where animals have been in order to quickly trace and eradicate diseases. You also have a lot of discussion and, from my perspective, confusion on this topic with marketing topics. Like, it's a good idea to be able to trace your animals because that way you can verify claims like they're non-hormone treated or something like that that could get you access to an international market or could get you the ability to be part of a branded beef program that brings premiums. Those are also great ways to utilize identification, but they're probably outside of the federal government reach in terms of mandating identification. Those are some things that producers are choosing to do voluntarily in order to try and increase the value of their calves.
So talk a little bit more about health,
Mhm.
right? So if cattle or livestock are transported in interstate commerce, is there also a requirement along with the official ID for there to be some kind of a health certificate?
There is a requirement. Those same classes of cattle we talked about earlier, the adult beef cattle, sexually intact, 18 months of age and older, and dairy cattle of any age. There's a requirement that in addition to being officially identified, they also have to have an ICVI or an Interstate Certificate of Veterinary Inspection, what we typically call a health certificate.
So what happens if, there's a livestock trailer going from, Indiana to Illinois and they get pulled over and somebody stops them and asks for identification. It's an Indiana driver's license or in Illinois at the time. What is the penalty for not having the official ID or perhaps the health certificates with you?
Realistically speaking, your traditional law enforcement is probably not going to be looking to enforce your animal ID requirements. I'd say
Mhm.
about the only real exception to that is there are a couple states that have what are called interdiction stations that you have to go through and kind of prove up that you've got your requirements in order to move through those stations. I'm thinking places like Florida that are just shaped in a way that is practical, right? It
Mhm.
is not practical to have animal health officials on every highway and rural, road in Illinois. That's not going to
Right.
work. So honestly, a lot of the enforcement in this area is complaint based, and when there are enforcement cases, we see a couple things. There could be enforcement against those animal owners because they are in violation of their requirement to be officially identified or have a health certificate. We also have seen some, and typically it'll start with a written warning and then it can build up to civil penalties. We
Mhm.
also have seen enforcement against veterinarians as well. If
Oh,
they are
interesting.
issuing a veterinary certificate that is not accurate, or maybe if they haven't seen those animals and are issuing veterinary certificates anyways, that's probably an area we've seen a little bit of an uptick in enforcement.
So Chelsea, I know that you work with LMA, the Livestock Marketing Association. What kind of work has LMA done in the realm of cattle traceability and animal disease traceability specifically?
This is a topic that I want to call it near and dear to my members, but maybe it's near and not dear to many of them. Only because we are a little bit of a pinch point, if you will. I think that as it relates to the adult animals, we've got a system that's working well. There is some pressure from some to try and push official ID to younger animals, feeder animals as well. And from an LMA perspective, we're not ready for that because if the animals are going to be actually identified on the farm, that's great. They come through the auction. We were able to read them. That would be a great process, easy, efficient flow. I think that's realistic some places in the West where we're branding or consistently working animals. But the further south and the further east we go, we've got a lot of producers that are small cow calf operators. They might have 10 mama cows. They don't have working facilities. Realistically, if those animals are going to get identified, they get identified at the local livestock auction. So I think that that's one of the reasons this has been such a difficult topic within my membership is because they see the expense of not just the cost of the tag itself, but the cost of having labor to tag those people, of getting animals in earlier, or trying to not slow down a sale and processing, and then also probably some additional risk of injury, things like that. So those are some of the challenges my membership sees, and because of that, we've been involved in pilot projects over the years and continue to have some involvement there, trying to figure out, for example, are some of the new electronic tag technologies more conducive to allowing cattle to continue to flow at a speed of commerce in a way that would allow our businesses to continue to operate.
So what's your biggest piece of advice when people call you and they've got, concerns or questions about cattle traceability, identification, or disease traceability in general?
I think that U.S. Department of Ag's animal disease traceability website is pretty good. It provides a lot of the background that's really helpful. The other thing that I was a part of, that I'm pretty proud of, is through the U.S. Animal Health Association, we have worked to create a website that's called interstatelivestock.com. There was a lot of frustration with veterinarians and producers and sale barns that all of these different states have different receiving requirements for livestock. Some of them require import permits, some of them require, for example, different kinds of TB testing of bulls, and it can get very confusing to figure out, okay, we've got our federal requirements, but what about our state requirements as well? Interstatelivestock.com is a really neat website that gives you drop downs where you say what state you're coming from, what state you're going to, a little bit of information about maybe the sex and age of the animals, and then what you get is not regulations, but kind of a bulleted, plain English. What do you have to do to make that movement in a legal way?
So to close with a couple quick questions, because we're in the middle of the COVID-19
Mhm.
pandemic. I don't know how things are right now in Kansas, but Illinois is presently in a shelter in place. But what has been the biggest silver lining for you in the middle of all this disaster?
Silver lining is a good way to put it. I have not slept in my own bed for more than like 4 days in a row for years. And I have slept in my own bed for like going on 45 days in a row now. And that's been pretty nice. That being said, I want to recognize it is a challenging time for our country and our industry. At
Mhm.
LMA, we spent a lot of those first couple of weeks just getting our livestock auctions able to continue to operate. Um, the federally, they've been pretty supportive, but every state makes their own declarations in terms of number of people that can be at a gathering, and local municipalities also have their own authorities there. And so we had to work state by state and locality by locality to prove up that livestock auctions are part of a critical infrastructure and food supply. And then at the same time, work with the auctions to figure out how do you social distance in this environment. Most of them are saying only buyers only in their sale. Many of them are adding an online bidding component to their
Mhm.
sale to allow people to participate remotely. So we're having to do business differently in order to continue to stay online.
And Chelsea, where can people find you online? What's your contact information for our listeners?
So if you're looking for LMA, our website is lmaweb.com. My email address is cgood@lmaweb.com. And then my phone number is 816-305-9540.
All right, excellent. Chelsea, thank you for coming again on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carrie.